Hello, everybody, and welcome to our discussion of Autofac, an adaptation of Philip K. Dick's short story of that name for the recent Amazon anthology series, Electric Dreams. My name is Sam Baker. I'm the incoming chair of the Good Systems Texas Grand Challenge initiative here at the University of Texas at Austin, where I'm Zoom casting to you from. And Good Systems is a project that takes faculty, students, and staff from all across campus and brings them together to address the grand challenge of how the emergent artificial intelligence technology that is so infusing our society now, and we expect even more so in the future, can be more ethical, can really be made good for people. As you can imagine, Good Systems thinks a lot about AI and automation and about the future of work. We have, in fact, a research focus area devoted to the future of work that's led by Sherry Greenberg and Ken Fleischman from the Good Systems team, who are here with us tonight on the Zoom. And we've been really delighted to join up with the Rappaport Center and their pop-up institute this summer, Beyond the Future of Work, to contribute to their programming by sharing what we've been learning about artificial intelligence in the future of work, and much more than that, to learn from the other Beyond the Future of Work participants about different ways of framing this ongoing future of work conversation that they've been developing. Specifically, we've been really interested in the reframing that's underway of future of work conversations around the concerns of the global South and around the new political and geopolitical situation that we find ourselves in, especially in relation to the pandemic of the past year and a half. Finally, the future of work conversation also includes really robust discussions of care work and of artistic work and how they're faring now and could fare in the future. And I think that we'll hear some resonances with those streams of discussion as our panel discussion continues. So some housekeeping for today. First of all, this is Zoom, but it's not a Zoom webinar. So everybody be aware of that and be careful, just to know that what audio and video you share, is being recorded and may be streamed on YouTube later on. And to those viewing us, thank you for your patience. Thank you in advance for your patience with the various, technical travails that we'll undergo here. Not quite yet having mastered this Zoom platform, even after all this time on it. We're always learning new things by trial and error. We'll be live tweeting this discussion tonight, so you can find that Twitter conversation happening if you follow the links and hashtags that are in the chat. And that will be a really great part of our discussion too. That hopefully can be carried on in that medium even after we're done here tonight. So here's how we plan to proceed. I'm going to start by introducing Nitin Verma and Simone Brown, our campus participants. Nitin and Simone are going to share with us some thoughts they have in relation to Autofac and more generally to the phenomenon of Amazon and other tech behemoths that clearly Dick in his indomitable way was prophesying, and that the makers of the show are gesturing towards, even as they take it to Amazon for its distribution. And so first Simone will speak, then Nitin will speak, and then I will introduce Bruce Sterling, who is joining us from Baeza in Spain. We're very excited to have Bruce with us here again. And Bruce will talk for a while, share his thoughts, and then we'll open up the discussion to everybody present. So thanks again very much for being here. And let me move now to introduce Simone Brown. So Simone Brown is Associate Professor in the Department of African and African Diaspora Studies here at the University of Texas, and the Director of the Critical Surveillance Inquiry, CSI for short, research focus area for good systems. Simone's currently working on following up her award-winning first book, Dark Matters, on the surveillance of Blackness, with a second, Like the Mixture of Charcoal and Darkness. And I understand this is a collection of essays and interviews that treat artists whose works grapple with the surveillance of Black life, from policing, privacy, smart dust, and the FBI's COINTELPRO to encryption, electronic waste, and artificial intelligence. And Simone's also a member of Deep Lab, a feminist collaborative composed of artists, engineers, hackers, writers, and theorists. And then after Simone, we'll hear from Nitin Verma, a PhD student in the School of Information here at UT Austin. Nitin's research focuses on the societal impact of deepfakes and other forms of AI-based synthetic media. By pursuing research in this area, Nitin aims to further our collective understanding of the future of disinformation, as well as how AI will shape the future of work in industries relying on creative content. All right, so take it away, Simone.
Thank you, Sam, for that great introduction. I'm excited. I'm excited to be here with you all today. I'm just going to share my screen, which I haven't done for a couple weeks since we stopped teaching. So I hope I do it well today. So I'll just start. A report titled "Primed for Pain: Amazon's Epidemic of Workplace Injuries" was released last month. It was authored by the Strategic Organizing Center, which is a democratic coalition of 4 labor unions that represent over 4 million workers. Some of the study's findings include the fact that Amazon fulfillment centers, the workers there are injured more frequently and more severely than workers in non-Amazon warehouses. Compared to Walmart, which is Amazon's largest retail competitor, the study found that rates of on-the-job injury is more than double. But what struck me about this report were some of the excerpts, which were responses from Amazon workers to the statement, "To keep me safe at work, Amazon should. To keep me safe at work, Amazon should understand that we are humans, not robots. Look at the people who form your team of as individuals with different strengths and ambitions, instead of an army of faceless numbers to manipulate into improving your metrics. And be more understanding about the rate of delivery of packages and not reprimand you when you are not delivering fast enough for them." Coincidentally, this report was released in the same month as Amazon introduced, let me just change this slide here, Amazon, which is a wellness box or a wellness chamber or a cage, or as this person put it in a tweet here, it's a panic attack room for Amazon workers. The company said that, quote, "During shifts, employees can visit Amazon stations and watch short videos featuring easy to follow well-being activities, including guided meditation, positive affirmations, and calming scenes with sounds." The tweet that Amazon put out announcing this program was quickly deleted, as well the video was removed, but I have a short clip from it here to play for you all.
Amazon, I wanted to provide a place that's quiet, that people could go and focus on their mental and emotional well-being. The Zen booth is an interactive kiosk where you can navigate through a library of mental health and mindful practices to recharge that internal battery.
So this box, was part of Amazon's Working Well program, which was piloted in 2020. And as a report in Motherboard told it, there was a pamphlet that was distributed last year to fulfillment center workers in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which described the workers as industrial athletes. And these industrial athletes should prepare themselves for work accordingly by training like the athletes that they are. But there was another box that Amazon, it's a box or a cage actually, that they patented in 2013. It's a human transport device that would allow a worker to move within this cage unhindered by other workers on the warehouse floor. And as a way to make a connection with Janelle Monáe's Alice from Autofac, this image here is of Mr. Rastus robot, which is sometimes called the mechanical Negro and sometimes called the mechanical slave. And it makes a curious link between robots, the electric company named Westinghouse, minstrel imagery, and the history of Black people's labor in the United States and beyond. It was designed by Philip Thomas and Samuel Kinter for Westinghouse Research Laboratories. This robot has dark rubber skin and was dressed in denim overalls and a bandana around his neck, which is an aesthetic gesture perhaps to Southern working class African-American farmers, as both raw denim and checked cotton have a history of being labeled as quote unquote Negro cloth, or the apparel of the enslaved who were regulated to wear nothing finer. Negro cloth laws in this way sought to establish a sartorial link, fine line actually, between those laboring unfreely and those who can wear finery. So Mr. Rastus, the mechanical Negro, was a Black robot introduced at the time of the Great Depression, invoking perhaps to soothe concerns around the idea of robots replacing human laborers. But unlike Westinghouse's other robots of the time, this robot was a symbol of Black servitude. And when this, quote, realistic mechanical Negro, unquote, appeared at the National Electric Light Association's conference in San Francisco in 1930, it was kind of like a sideshow. It was part of Westinghouse using robots as a marketing strategy for its various household appliances and other innovations. Rastus could bow, the robot could say a few pre-recorded words, and the robot had one main trick. He was made to enact the legend of William Tell. His inventor would aim an arrow at an apple on his head, which would light activate a photoelectric cell in his eye, and the apple on his head would explode. The name Rastus is part of the roster of these distorted depictions of Blackness that often take the shape of figurines, postcards, kitchen utensils, lawn ornaments, and images on food boxes, such as pancakes and rice. And these exaggerated representational strategies do the work of rationalizing the economic exploitation of Black domestic workers and those who labor in low-paying conditions in the service sector. So Rastus the Mechanical Negro is one story, but it's an old story and one of many that get us to think about the links between the afterlife of slavery and what it can teach us about our artificial and inhuman present. There is seemingly a historical continuity when it comes to the shape that data, how training data gets shaped, and who is in the room overseeing the training. And to think of the robot as a marketing strategy, this is a short commercial that I'll play here.
It's just flawless, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, I literally couldn't imagine a more beautiful vessel for Alexa to be inside. Alexa, how many tablespoons are in a cup?
There are 16 tablespoons in a cup. Babe, food just got here. Why you cooking? What's that?
Alexa, turn on the sprinklers.
Honey, I already ran the sprinklers. Things that get way too wet around here.
Alexa, dim the lights.
But I'll save you.
Alexa, lights up! Alexa, lights up!
Add bath oils to my shopping list.
Alexa, no, don't do that.
Read my audiobook.
I was in his hands. I was being changed. I realized that I was also kissing him.
Honey, other people have to use the bathroom around here too.
So that is Michael B. Jordan as Alexa. And these are, part of the kind of feel-good strategies that Christian Parenti calls the soft selling of surveillance. And you could say it's the same about reality television and also police procedural dramas like Propaganda, for the ways in which these representational strategies normalize surveillance technology. Similarly, I'm sure you've all seen, a Ring doorbell footage with postal workers shoveling snow from a customer's driveway, or being thankful for cookies or other food items left outside the door. And these kinds of sharing of these videos serve also as promotional video for Amazon's suite of Ring technology, their Alexa digital assistants and other surveillance technologies for the consumer market that are often tied to policing. Interestingly, this commercial was released on television, at least, during the last Super Bowl. This is the same NFL that announced today that as part of its concussion settlement, that it would stop, quote, race norming, which is the assumption that Black football players start off with a lower cognitive function than white players. And this practice made it more difficult for Black retirees from the league to make claims of cognitive impairment as a result of on-the-job injury. So what happens when Alexa goes to Accra? This is to say that there can be no big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, or voice control digital assistants without the materials that make up its infrastructure. You can think here of Kate Crawford and Vladin Joler's Anatomy of an AI system that maps the life cycle of an Amazon Echo through the lens of extraction, labor extraction, data extraction, and the extraction of our planetary resources. I shouldn't have said our there, but other planetary resources. Or the work of Nicole Steriolski on undersea cables and the turbulent ecologies, as she calls them, of coastal environments where cables land. And so we have to situate questions of accountability, our own complicity when it comes to the health effects of the people who do these loosely unregulated waste work when it comes to dismantling, sorting, dealing, burning, and sometimes repairing electronics like laptops, desktops, game consoles, cell phones. And so waste here is the secondhand consumer electronics and electronic equipment that is often imported to sites such as Africa, China, and elsewhere, where they're at the end of life stage, often coming from Europe, the UK, and North America. And while some end-of-life products can be reused or refurbished, the notion of repair here seems to act as an alibi for these products being imported, where the goal is the recycling of copper, aluminum, and other materials made raw once again to be then exported out of the country to make new devices. So I visited Accra, Ghana in 2019 to look at, to spend some time with a research team there at the University of Ghana that was doing some work on the longitudinal study on the health effects of those that do this unregulated waste work. And you can, this type of, as a site of an inquiry, of course, we have to take into account the colonial underpinnings of this aspect of the supply chain and contextualize it within a legacy of imperialism and the inequalities associated with global capitalism. So this is all of our cell phones, televisions, small and large household appliances like microwaves and refrigerators that are, basically put apart for any available copper, trace amounts of gold, platinum, and other elements from this recycled electronic markets. And so the outcome of this waste work is toxic exposure to elements such as lead and mercury, copper, arsenic, soil pollution, drinking water pollution, livestock and food supply contamination, respiratory problems, burns, and these things. And you can see from the image, the third image, the one, I guess, in the center, that when these circuit boards are dismantled by hammer and then wires pulled apart by hand, you can see that there's kind of a particulate matter like small gold or copper dust particles that form hazardous air pollutants all around that are then inhaled. About 200 feet further from that is the kind of acrid air from the burning of high impact thermoplastics that you can think about how respiration of this particulate matter gets into the human body. And so to close, I will return to a statement from a worker at an Amazon fulfillment center in Kentucky that is quoted in the report by the Strategic Organizing Center. And this person says, "Do not demand so much production since we are people, not machines." Thank you.
Thank you. And Simone, that was fantastic. And we move now to Nitin Verma for a few thoughts on what we've all seen and been thinking about.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks, Dr. Brown, for that presentation. Um, Speaking of the story, the little film or episode that we saw, and the story it is based on, my mind was kind of stuck on one phrase in my head, which was like automation of production on steroids. But that reference or that metaphor actually being implying much worse in this case, because it's almost like this automation of industrial production has become so resilient that it can survive its own destruction and can be resurrected from the debris that is created out of it. But ultimately, I think from a future of work perspective, given that this story was originally written in 1955, I feel, yes, this is incredibly long foresight on part of Philip K. Dick. And ultimately, my take is that this is a reflection of this adaptation from Amazon was like a reflection of how production, quick shipping, and the way the demand is being created for consumers is being met at the cost of whether or not there are users actually want stuff or not. And that to me stands out. This is like a brief take that I would say I had. And I cannot help but think of what Google presented a couple of weeks ago. They're constantly working on customer support automation, which is potentially what was represented by I think Alice in this case. It's all happening. It's all enmeshed with part fiction and part reality of how demands are being met right now.
And Nitin, I want to take the opportunity of your turn on the dais to get into our super text, because Nitin and I have been having a bit of a back and forth around the Philip K. Dick story, which involved him, Nitin, reading it before I had read it. I sent it to him, sent the PDF to the participants, but then I hadn't gotten around to reading it yet. And he said, "Oh, it was so interesting, right?" And I said, "Don't give me any spoilers yet." But now I have read it, and so I will just go this far with the spoiler for anyone else who hasn't, which is to say that in the Philip K. Dick story, there's not just one Autofac. There are numerous Autofacs. They are automated factories. They're not, one necessarily one corporation, even like Amazon. And what happens is that the nuclear holocaust that the world lives through sets off eventually a war between the Autofacts, and the role of the humans, who do remain humans, are not shown to be androids, in the Philip K. Dick story, is to try to play off the different Autofacts against each other, which makes me think of what feels like the futile effort we sometimes have to say, well, no, Apple will be the good tech company that will save us from Amazon and Google, or whatever kind of configuration we want to set up. And then how did you think about like the kind of war scenario in Dick? Did it feel like a 50s thing to you, or did it feel contemporary to you as well?
In terms of imagery, it did remind me of those apocalyptic Hollywood renderings of whenever they imagine stuff like this. But it seemed weirdly fresh to me. And actually, I just looked up that when the story was actually written. So I was assuming that this was written sometime in the 80s, when computers were like properly coming into automation, as far as my understanding goes. So, and the war, the worst thing or the most interesting thing that feeling that I felt while reading the actual book was, there was this passage where the total global conflict, as it is referred to, the war that took place, that the Autofac and the machines are so bent on carrying on that they don't even need real humans. They are just competing with one another. Sorry for the spoilers. It's hard to.
Well, we haven't given away the true ending of the story yet, but I will say that the Dick's descriptions of the competing Autofac bots mining and remining the terrain of destruction while humans stand by and try to manipulate it or get something for themselves, does have a desert of the real kind of feeling that Simone's manifesting to us of Alexa, and is it Accra, Simone? Right? Resonates with for me, that in the original Dick story you get a sense of that, of the sheer materiality of this overproduction and the danger of it, that maybe isn't so represented in the film that we saw. Yeah. And also, like in the actual story, the materiality aspect that you mentioned is more connected to everyday products that are being produced by the factory. Like it starts with the example of milk containers being dropped off by auto-navigating trucks coming out from the factory. So yeah, there's a connection that's hard to miss. So this is great. And now we're excited to welcome back Bruce Sterling, who some of you saw and heard at our Bad AI and Beyond Festival of Student Creative Work this past fall. With this return visit, Bruce establishes himself as, to set the title of one of his collections, our visionary in residence, even, or maybe especially, if he's beaming in again from Europe, where it's after midnight. But we all enjoy hearing Bruce talk at Austin events, like a recent well-reviewed appearance of Book People, just as our colleagues used to enjoy running into him at parties back in the day. And maybe we'll have that pleasure again in the future, face-to-face, as well as via the Zoom medium. Bruce's vast body of work has made him, in the words of Publishers Weekly, godfather of cyberpunk, who blends uncompromising realism and irrepressible optimism. Cory Doctorow has said of Bruce that he understands technology's present and future better than anyone in the field. And I'm not sure who surpasses him as a double threat who's leveled all the way up as both a fabulist and a futurist. We're looking very much forward to his remarks today regarding Amazon's take on Philip K. Dick's take on Amazon. Take it away, Bruce. Oh, you are muted, Mr. Argento. Let's see.
Everybody makes that mistake. It's quite fantastic. So I'm zooming in from my basement in Ibiza here, and I could only wish I was at my alma mater, UT. But yeah, I was interested to see this reference to this Philip K. Dick story, Autofac, which in fact I had read, but it was many years ago. So I was going over it, and I was pleased that it's actually one of his better works. I mean, he was 25 when he wrote this, and was still relatively mentally healthy by Philip K. Dick standards. So, and it's really a visionary piece, the original work of fiction. It's got self-driving cars, it's got autonomous robot factories, it's got Android chat bots that speak in a very convincingly Android way. It's even got dropouts in favelas who are refuseniks, who managed to have nothing to do with the Autofac system. And then its necessary twist ending, because every Galaxy magazine story had a twist ending. It's got nanotechnology and self-replication, which is a really exotic thing to find in a story written when I was 1 year old. And, I'm a pretty old guy now, so this is actually a work from the middle of the 20th century. Oh, and of course it's set in a post-atomic dystopia, but not a lot of that was made of it, because in the 50s that was a very common backdrop. It was sort of a given thing. So, here in Europe, Philip K. Dick is really an idolized figure, and he has a higher literary reputation than he does in the USA, where he's mostly seen as kind of fodder for movie rights. And even Stanislav Lem, who was like the grumpiest critic, grumpiest European critic of American science fiction, said that Philip K. Dick was the visionary among the charlatans. Everybody else in American science fiction was just writing fairy stories, whereas Philip K. Dick was actually the real deal by the standards of Stanislav Lem, which is kind of high praise. But given that this is about, you're having a feature here, or a seminar really about the future of work, I thought I'd talk a little bit about what economic labor is like for science fiction writers, because it's really an interesting and kind of dismal scene. And many people argue that, it was this kind of Stakhanovite labor in the minds of science fiction that eventually caused Philip K. Dick to go quite mad. So, I have a fairly large body of work. I'm, a very glib guy as a sci-fi writer, but, I don't think I've written a quarter of the amount of material that Philip K. Dick did. And this particular story, although he obviously wrote it very quickly and maybe did 2 drafts, is actually relatively coherent compared to the ones later in his career, where he had a very advanced pill problem. He was just way into stimulants and was just kind of speed rattling away at the computer. You can kind of smell the amphetamine coming off the page there. So he's writing this for Galaxy, which is one of the better paying magazines. It's 9,000 words long. He's getting maybe 3 or 4 cents a word for it. He's a graduate of UC Berkeley, but he never had any major at UC Berkeley. He just sort of like hung out at the school until he graduated and it was time to go. And he seems to have been pretty much conventionally unemployable during his entire life. And I think this is true of a lot of 20th century classic science fiction writers like H.P. Lovecraft, who, like Philip K. Dick, is now in the Library of America and is considered, a very important literary figure in American popular fiction. Lovecraft used to live on 19 cents a day. And he never had a standard job. He did a little bit of ghost writing that was like commercial writing, but other than that, he basically starved. I mean, he died of Bright's disease in the 40s, but he was just like really, really poor. And even a famous figure like Ray Bradbury, who did quite a lot of work for Twilight Zone and did the film drafts for Moby Dick, and ended up as a relatively wealthy man. When he was writing Fahrenheit 451, he was so poor that he wrote that novel on a rented typewriter where you had to put in a dime, in order to get this machine to sort of, go along and not run out of time. So, there just wasn't much of an economic basis for science fiction. It was really a fringe activity, a cult activity, really. And, Philip K. Dick is one of the worst possible figures you could imitate as a science fiction writer. I mean, his career was really disastrous. He had major drug problems. He got married 5 times. He couldn't be bothered to divorce them. He didn't have the money to divorce his wives. He'd simply leave. He had periodic mental breakdowns, attempted suicide on an occasion or not. And this is like actually one of America's best known and most respected science fiction writers. But really, not just a visionary, but a crank, and a guy who was heading for, eventual mental breakdown. He had this famous pink beam episode after he was spending a lot of time in this kind of drug culture house in LA. I knew some of his disciples there, James P. Blaylock, Tim Powers, K.W. Jeter. They were younger science fiction writers, contemporaries of mine, inventors of the steampunk genre. They knew Philip K. Dick rather well. and they used to like drop by his pad and try to see to it that he wasn't coming to harm. I mean, they were basically looking after the guy, who was just, a very difficult figure and kind of hopeless. Okay, so he was, he's this kind of really a mad creature who's like devoted to this kind of genre writing that nobody can really make pay. And he was like really, really poor for quite a while. Eventually, the European royalties kind of bailed him out a little bit, but he had such a bohemian lifestyle and such an inability to keep a bank account balance that you really couldn't fix him no matter how much money you poured into him. In science fiction, it was basically, a crank hobby for cultists until about 1965, when Damon Knight formed the Science Fiction Writers of America, which was a kind of labor union or guild, so that it was a little more difficult for the pulp editors to simply cheat people like Philip K. Dick. And there was also a certain amount of solidarity among science fiction writers, like Ursula Le Guin, who was a high school colleague of Dick. They went to the same high school. She used to write him peppy letters to try to keep his morale up. And Robert Heinlein, who actually made some money, actually loaned Philip Dick money to get along on occasion, even though they had radically different kind of politics. Heinlein, was rather well-to-do as sci-fi writers went, and he knew that Dick was a genius, and he just couldn't allow the guy to starve to death. So basically, he just did this kind of collegial thing, and that's how it went in the business, and really until like Star Trek came along, and people started being able to make money in other forms of media besides pulp publication and paperback originals. So now you have figures in science fiction who are quite well-to-do, like, say, George R.R. Martin or Neil Gaiman, who are actually millionaires and own their own radio stations and so forth. But that's just not what economics was like for science fiction writers for quite a while. And, even though Philip K. Dick is a terrible example of how to behave as a creative figure, he's by no means the worst person in his circle, because that would have been his contemporaries, L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of the Scientology cult, who got tired of starving to death as a science fiction writer and just decided to start his own exploitative religious cult. And then Jack Parsons, the utter Pasadena lunatic of the Love and Rocket scheme, who is one of the founders of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and also the main acolyte of Crowley, the sinister Satanist mystic. He was Aleister Crowley's #1 source of funding, and he was also a major league science fiction fan. Jack Parsons, he actually had a house in Pasadena because he came from inherited wealth, and he had what was known as a fan shack, where numbers of sci-fi devotees in the 1940s would come in from all over the world and basically stay at Jack Parsons' abode. And the same was true of Philip Dick. He also had a fan shack where a number of science fiction drug addicts sort of hung up and basically crashed on his couch and consumed narcotics and gave them to him. So, that was that was classic behavior in the genre. It's sort of how people got by. And it's kind of a miracle that this occurred at all. And I'm of a generation where this kind of starvation wages for science fiction writers was considered kind of an occupational hazard. And if you decided to become a science fiction writer, you were kind of deciding to immolate yourself. I mean, it was like becoming a professional poet. You had this sort of calling to do it, and there was kind of no reason to think that you would ever make any money.
Now, your intuition is right, Bruce. You're really what you're saying is really resonating with the Beyond the Future of Work program. In fact, we have And Lewis here on the Zoom from RTF, the documentary filmmaker who is helping run the stream in the Beyond the Future of Work Institute about exactly questions of artistic labor, right, and the future of that. And just before I forget, I wanted to say that one of the reasons that we thought of getting back with you for this is how fascinating your descriptions of the kinds of workshops and productive collectivities that you've been working with in Europe were when you were here in October. So just a note that I'd love to hear something about what you're doing now, that might contrast or might not contrast with some of these collective projects of yesteryear.
Well, yeah, I mean, science fiction writers are not the sample group here. The genuine core group is musicians, because whatever happens to musicians eventually happens to everybody. And science fiction is just not a large enough profession. I mean, it's more like a club. I mean, it's fairly big now. There's like maybe somewhere near 2,000 people who are like members of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America and can consider themselves to be published science fiction writers, but that's just not a very large labor group. I mean, that's really an eccentric thing to be, and of course, 90% of them don't earn a living at it, because no writer learns a living, really. I mean, most published writers they have day jobs, or they're wealthy, or the wife works, or the husband works, or whatever. And that's true even in a major source of publishing like the USA, where there's actually large readership and a major language. So here in Italy, we do have science fiction, and we have fantascienza, which is that. But fantascienza is smaller because Italy is smaller than the USA. So there are some professional fantascienza writers, and then Bruno Argento, who is my alias there. Bruno Argento is actually my alias for participating in Italian science fiction, where, by the way, I have never earned a living. I mean, even though I'm a rather well-known Italian science fiction writer, and I write for Italian magazines, and I publish Italian books that have no English language equivalent, and I've even won Italian awards, I would certainly starve to death if I was a full-time Italian science fiction writer.
Now, so a couple things, just to state the kind of elephant in the room also is that a third tribe of precarity alongside writers and musicians is academics, right? And,
right.
In recent years on campus, we've been consumed with, really difficult conversations about the sustainability, in particular for graduate students, but also for those who work through their 20s to get PhDs, of an academic pursuit, right? And this is at a state-sponsored university. But just putting that on the table, also, what we like to imagine about Europe is that, well, in Europe, the state supports its artists, right? In Europe, the state supports its academics. What's your experience been of the success or lack of success of state support?
Well, you can always find some area of creative expression that the state is unwilling to support. And that has been the case by art practice in Turin. So in Turin, I am the art director for Share Festival, which is a yearly event where we have technology art. And we had a lot of internet art at Share Festival. And there was basically no economic basis for it. And a lot of internet art is created by academics who are like coders or whatever, and they're like coming up with they're basically perverting or hacking devices and services that have not been used for artistic purposes before.
And Simone's got some great colleagues who do, people.
Well, yeah. So but right now we're having kind of a major crisis, or really the biggest change in our situation that I think I've seen in about 15 years. Which is the sudden arrival on the scene of non-fungible tokens supported by crypto money, where a lot of people who were, basically hobbyists or really fanatics who we knew and supported for years have suddenly found a way to monetize their activities. So, you know, you can now get like code artists and motion graphics people and 3D people and people from the FX world and people from game design who are suddenly finding themselves to be artists. Some, like Beeple, suddenly make $70 million of imaginary crypto money, but a lot of them are simply making more money than they've ever made before. And they've also never been in a position where they even had patrons or collectors. And now they do. And they're in social media. So they're in this kind of bizarre cluster of patrons, collectors, and social media. And I'm really spending a lot of my time right now just trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And nobody knows. I mean, there's people are sort of inventing language in a new way very rapidly. And it's super spiky because, you know, everything that crypto coinage touches dies. I mean, the blockchain just strangles everybody and kind of ruins and perverts anything it has anything to do with. But this is like, you know, the classic, a classic monetization and professionalization of a situation that we've been involved in that was, you know, more or less outlaw cyberpunk hackerdom. I mean, these were cyberpunk people, and they were refuseniks and dropouts. And some of them had state support doing other kinds of art, and some of them were academics and so forth. But a lot of the most famous ones were just like people from Russia who couldn't get any kind of notice in Europe, but could by just putting their work out on the internet for free. And they were creating these kinds of open source, shareable kind of platforms. And now those are very rapidly going to by the by because people just don't want to waste their time creating for those. They'd much prefer to go mint something for their, you know, blockchain marketplace. I mean, the language isn't well settled now. The most entertaining one is Hikit Nunk. If you want to watch just one, because it's Brazilian. So it's just really a weird situation, and a lot of it's one of the more artistically centered ones. So, but no, it's really a fantastic thing to witness, and it's kind of like, I mean, it's a little bit like the historic experience of science fiction after the Sputnik was launched, when, you know, people who had just been like cranks were suddenly getting a new form of cultural credibility. And it may be, you know, there may be a situation where there's more economic stability in these kinds of tech art expressions, because there is a generation of wealthy collectors now, and most of them are people from technical backgrounds, and they're actually bored by the idea of buying fancy paintings or tedious bronze statuary. They're young, you know, millennials and post-millennials, and they want stuff that looks like games. You know, I mean, they want stuff that looks like games or sci-fi cinema, and they like, you know, YouTube snippets. They like memes. You know, they like to buy memes. They consider memes like their native form of fine art. And, you know, I can sympathize with all of that stuff because I've been curating it for ages, but now we're trying to figure out what we do with it as a festival. I mean, we used to do a lot of internet stuff like this, but the era in which we could be the internet experts is kind of over, because the pandemic has made everybody an internet expert. I mean, everybody in European culture has been Zooming around, and, you know, they're online just like us. And actually the experience of pandemic in Turin has kind of dissolved all the boundaries and little castes that there used to be in their art system. I mean, they were so crushed, and they're, you know, I mean, literally the museums were locked down, and in Italy, you know, it hit hard and fast. So they have a kind of lifeboat survivor ethic at this point. And there's a lot of money to throw around. I mean, there's not going to be much of a tourist season, so there's not going to be the standard foot traffic. But we're coming back from the dead in my festival, and we're coming back in a very different economic and social situation than we were in 2019. I mean, we're really facing the 2020s in its own native techno-social situation. And, you know, and quite frankly, I mean, this is a big tech oligarchy. mean, that's what we live in now.
I didn't follow the news closely, but Southwest sold. Did South by Southwest sell to a big holding company? Do people know the story?
I'm not following Austin closely enough to tell you.
The festival.
I know that Alamo, the cinema chain, had to go bankrupt and be bought by somebody else and then come back from the dead. I don't doubt that South by had to clutch at straws because they have a huge budget and they need to basically double the population of Austin in order to make bank. So, and there are a lot of events in Europe that have similarly failed. And I'm in Ibiza and there hasn't been a disco here in a year. And they're hoping to get like the vaccination services and bring in a few punters from, Germany and some of the less infected countries. But this is going to be a very limpy version of what's normally a very dynamic music scene, like an Austin level of pop music and disco and sex tourism and narcotics. It's very Austin-like here, actually. As every crime Austin has, and then some.
I think that might have been in Austin of a previous century, but Bruce, this is all fantastic, and I want to open up the floor to further thoughts, cycling back to Simone and Nitin, just what's on your mind, having all heard each other, and then if you have a question from the floor, you can put it in, actually, because we're not in a webinar, we don't have the little Q&A, but go right ahead and pop into the chat that you're ready to ask a question. You can put your question there, or you can say, hey, call on me, and we'll do that. So Simone, back to you for a bit.
Really?
No, you can pass. I just, if you've got,
I'm actually like, I'm still curious as to what an NFT is and how, how sustainable is it? When are the lawsuits coming, from all the GIFs or GIFs that have been monetized in this way? So, that's something that I'm curious about.
Yeah, well, this is going to be a difficult thing to explain. So we've actually revived our weblog at Share Festival just to try to get up to speed on this. But, really the things that are driving the collectors and the artists are not what the kind of popular reaction is about. The popular reaction is based on fear and hatred of the blockchain, which is frankly entirely merited because blockchains are just unbelievably wicked, and their environmental crimes are the least of their misdeeds. Okay, they're ransomware people who are rampaging across the USA. Who they're shutting down beef plants, they're shutting off oil pipelines. They're really damaging the American industry in its heart, and that activity would be impossible without crypto coinage. And that's how they shake people down. This is literal kidnapping of people's computers. Literally taking them ransom. It's like yo ho ho piracy from state-supported marauders, and that's a crypto coinage thing. And crypto coin people launder that, and there was a lot of laundering through the NFTs. Because there was a lot of money there was a lot of crypto coinage which had been sort of marked for death by law enforcement people. But if you buy NFTs with it, you can launder some of your ill-gotten gains, and that's kind of typical of art market shenanigans, right? It's like I sell art to myself at an inflated price, and I pocket the difference, and then I can declare it in my taxes, and then I have clean money where I had dirty money. Okay, I used to be a computer crime writer. I wrote the book Hacker Crackdown because the police were raiding Austin game companies. So I know a lot of cops and I know a lot of computer security people, as you would kind of expect a cyberpunk to know. So, the depths of mayhem that are going on behind this are much more complicated than people understand. They're just a big nexus of peculiar shenanigans going on here that are kind of fantastic. People think it's going to collapse because the blockchains pollute a lot. That's the least of their problems. You can easily run a green blockchain. Hic-et-Nunc is on Tezos, which is a non-polluting blockchain. There are blockchains around now that actually are carbon negative. They'll like suck pollution out of the sky. So yeah, so that's a real puzzle. That's a head scratcher, right? It's like, wait a minute, they're like better for the environment than normal banks and the American dollar. Yeah, they're lots better. And it's not hard to do. It's like windmills and solar panels are sweeping Texas. They're just all over the place. You just go pay for green power. It's like not a problem for them.
Nitin,
the problems they have are, they're more complex, and they're really more about social media cultism and these kinds of, well, what they call meme stocks now, like AMC right now, the movie company, has become a meme stock, like GameStop was a meme stock. And these are guys who, they're on Reddit and these other kinds of social media things, but these are the kind of cultist bros who have some money and like really tight social media things, and they can form investment gangs and just sort of show up and like warp the market in their own direction.
I want to ask Nitin about this because we have, a misinformation expert from the School of Information. And Nitin, in all my conversations with you and other iSchool colleagues, we haven't really gotten into the whole blockchain NFT zone, but you all must be having to take that into consideration now. Is that something that you see coming on the horizon for kind of work you do?
Yes and no. So yes, in the sense that the role of blockchain and the related technological infrastructure is being proposed as one of the bullets in the list of solutions to, say, something like synthetic media detection online. And synthetic media would be anything that is like a video or an audio or even a text article, for example, produced by AI based on whatever it learns from what humans have created. So yes, that is on the horizon. That will, I'm sure, bubble up pretty soon as a tech fix to an emergent problem. But then, since I'm not really in my personal capacity in the solution space as of now, so it's still, I'm waiting and watching. Like, okay, what are those folks doing with that technology that still I still haven't fully grasped?
Well, you'll always be in the solution space for me. So I'm going to, on the note of human AI partnership that just sounded, I'm going to make a leap here to Sabrina Barton on the Zoom, who tells us in the chat that she has a question that goes with an image that she has sent me. So I'm going to share the image, and then Sabrina, give you the floor to pose your question. Have we got you, Sabrina?
Is she muted?
Sabrina, you may be muted. Well, we'll circle back to Sabrina. Oh no, here she's.
Am I unmuted now?
Now you're here. Okay, so I'm going to do your share again.
I was attempting to
Very
unmute
good.
myself.
I'm glad we're here.
And I now see that we all share this challenge. I'm engrossed, and I have no memory that I'm also mute. Okay. So I'm not seeing, Sam, I'm not seeing the
you sharing some
the screenshot. I'm seeing something else about.
Oh yeah, seeing that.
Yeah.
1 second.
Okay.
I just thought that by now that we were so. How's that? Does that get it?
No, we're seeing something about host.
Same thing still, Sam. Same thing.
Okay, well, sorry.
All right, so you know what? Let me see if I can both share my screen and read my notes. Let's see if I'm allowed to share my screen. Okay, share screen. Okay, how's that?
Yeah, we've got your screen.
Oh,
These look like your notes.
Damn, I don't want to share my notes. Hold on. Don't
They're interesting.
Doritos. Okay, stop share. Can't believe I'm not doing a better job with this. Try one more time.
It's originally my failure here. So
okay, I'm not seeing it on my desktop. Shoot.
I do.
Oh, I think because my Zoom's on my desktop. That's the problem. Let me see if I can. Darn. I have the screenshot on my desktop. I'm trying to understand how I can.
Is it the same
share?
There it is. There it is.
Oh, okay.
I might have done it. Someone did it.
Okay, good. Now, is it big enough for people to make out the image?
Yes.
Okay. And my second question is, when I click to my notes, are you seeing my notes or the image?
I think we have the image still.
We're the image now.
Yes. I shall
Yeah,
proceed.
We're seeing Sam's screen actually, so I think you're good.
Yeah, I got it done.
As long as you're, oh, okay. Whatever screen you're seeing, it's the image. Okay. I want to take seriously Sam's comment that also came from Sarita Gupta's comment about the work of artists and other and sci-fi writers and other cultural workers around how it matters how we're representing the future of work, how we're representing workers. And what really struck me watching Autofac was it's a very old story in a way about the intersection of the human and the non-human. Going back to ancient Greece, Ovid's Pygmalion story, create the perfect woman and bring her alive, but probably most famously, Freud's using of E.T.A. Hoffman's short story, The Sandman, to talk about the uncanny, the blurry line between that which is me and that which is not me. And so that particular intersection, no, really most famous, Mary Shelley, Frankenstein. Sorry, that's what I meant to say, Frankenstein, right? Let's take all these pieces of a human body and then use electricity to bring them to life. And in the novella, it's that creature brought to life is called the monster, and it's Dr. Frankenstein who's the human bringing him to life. So the reason I was interested in this screenshot in particular is the way in which it's all screens and reflections and simulacra. In other words, there isn't a human in the room. What we have is, if you look where the computer screen is with the circle there, then you see it's hard to make out, but there's a reflection of Alice in that computer screen. And it's also reflecting in that green with the kind of picket fence looking thing. It's reflecting the memories of Emily that aren't really memories, but these images of her friends and her world, and it's green and it's real. That's the space of the real, I think. Home movies, right? They're real, except they're simulacra. Everything is simulacra here. And then we have those electrical sources, I think there, that zigzag in the right hand. I think they're electrical sources. And then in the deep focus there, we have Emily strapped to the table like Frankenstein's monster. And she's hooked up to the machine that's downloading her data archive. And the question I want to ask really is related to, there's a lot of discussion and discourse around the human tech partnerships and where is the intersection of the human and the tech. And there's a lot of very optimistic conversation about that future. What does Autofac tell us about that relationship for the future, the human tech relationship? Because even as Emily insists they thought they were real, I had to play along. Something happened. I started to believe them. Autofac put something real in us without meaning to. We are real. We are humanity's second chance. So the question is, I mean, what do you all think watching Autofac, or just more generally about the tech-human intersection, and what the second chance looks like. And this is a little bit related to Neville's question about what's outside of automation and simulacra.
Yeah,
And,
I want to take it right to Neville because Neville, I took your question to be a bit about love and what love is
right
here in this movie and what it was for Huxley and Brave New World, but also I was thinking with this movie about social reproduction and sexual reproduction, and the production here that is social reproduction that is not sexual reproduction, right? Because androids are crafting each other, right? And they're able to do so by through the communities that they find. So was that what you were picking up on too? And what do you think about the representation we got in that?
Okay, I mean, I first watched this. Can you hear me? Am I unmuted?
Gotcha.
I mean, we in the mechanical reproduction of voice here, which is also bizarre. I mean, I first watched that episode like an hour ago, so I haven't had a chance to sit with it. But I mean, I'm glad Sabrina took us back to Frankenstein, because I did feel it was like a very actually old story. And I think it is also a story about capitalism, but actually in an old way. That actually Autofac is the literalization of, let's say, Adam Smith's invisible hand. That actually the anxiety is, and it's also there in the fetish character of the commodity. The anxiety there is that actually humans have externalized and have kind of lost. I mean, and what's interesting here is there are the capitalists are, I mean, we're not in a class enemy story. And we can talk about Autofac as maybe like a displacement of the capitalist class, but we've lost use value, we've lost utility in the story. And we've also lost any sense of human control of destiny. And what's left to fight it in that episode is sort of like romance. And so I think the episode for me reflects a deeply liberal public-private split that actually I think is very difficult to recuperate agency from. So that's where I was just like, okay, what's outside the circuit of labor here? And it's not even reproduction. It's sort of like feeling and heterosexual romantic feeling with a capital F as the definition of the human. And then, okay, the other way that I find it deeply conservative is we're also in a genealogical imagination. So even though it's the androids replicating each other, there's some notion of ancestry. Mm-hmm. Like her mother was the founder of Autofac.
And the crystallization of Emily Zabrisky's celebrity in the magazine article, that's like, that is the linchpin of the whole thing.
But I mean, I also think there's a very weird kind of feminist racial politics in there. In the sense that it's do we want to think of Alice as the step-grandchild of, what was his name, Mr. Rastus robot? And she also, I mean, and that robot is presented as having other kinds of sexual possibilities to the romance. So the robot is kind of impersonal sex. I don't know. Oh, and then, okay, so those are my senses of the ways in which it's actually a deeply conservative representation of the possibilities of futurity, and actually a return to high humanism as the solution, even as we know that a certain version of high humanism is what gives rise to racial capitalism and has kind of got us into this mess in the first place. I mean, I know I'm talking in irresponsible big sweeps. Then I just had two lit crit arbitrary small thoughts. Okay, Zabriskie is a weird name. So I was Googling frantically while I was watching. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I mean, my first thought was the Michelangelo Antonioni movie, Zabriskie Point. But Zabriskie Point is actually named after the point that looks over Death Valley, which is the lowest point in America. So I wondered why, I mean, and I believe Bruce when he says that Philip K. Dick was crazy, but I still sort of think Zabriskie is interesting. And in terms of a literary genealogy, it's not, I mean, for me, it's significant that the robot's called Alice. We through the looking glass, we're in earlier imaginings of, I don't know, the dangers of feminized power, feminized child power. So I think there's a lot going on there. These are just some of my unprocessed thoughts upon watching that in relation to sort of what people see or what Philip K. Dick and Amazon, and I mean the deep ironies of Amazon making this particular episode, I think also need to be registered. So I think we actually get quite a conservative vision of the human and a kind of medievalist fantasy of the future. Like, let's get rid of the machines and let's have clean air again.
I'm in gallery view. I'm going to look for a hand. Does anybody want to Bruce, we'll kick it to you.
Yeah. Well, you know, what we've got here is what we cyberpunks used to call the ontological riff, which was something that Philip K. Dick was extremely famous for doing. So he would always build these kind of Chinese boxes of narrative where this reality is the subset of that reality, and that one is the subset of that one, and that one is the subset of that one. And then you kind of pop back, but you don't go all the way up, and it's left unresolved. So that's very typical Philip K. Dick narrative move, the ontological riff, where
it's famous for
Yeah.
Blade Runner, right?
Well, yeah, well, you know,
for those who don't know, right? This
series is called, well, Blade Runner was called The Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, right? And this is the Electric Dream series, and they're all Philip K. Dick things. So the story that he wrote, which is called Autofac, does not in fact have this ontological riff in it. Instead, what they did was they took the characters and they put in the android ontological riffing in there, which is very true to the spirit of Philip K. Dick, but not particularly true to the original narrative. So you sort of ask yourself, okay, well, wait a minute, this guy's deliberately muddying the waters of what is real in the novel. So what's outside the novel and what is real? And in the case of Philip K. Dick, it's always Phil's next novel. And he like tears the one out of the typewriter, bundles it up, sends it off to Ace Books, and immediately begins the next one because he's got to write 40 of them to make the rent, right? And that was his habit. I mean, he would write a whole lot, and he would take a lot of speed to write a whole lot. And they were kind of an endless kind of personal mythology that he was writing. And eventually, and he was not crazy at first. At first, he was just a visionary, but eventually the drug abuse took its toll, and he had this mental breakdown thing, and he actually became a kind of one-man religious fanatic where he actually thought he contacted God, and he wrote this extremely long speed-driven exegesis, which was like 800,000 words long, which is all about what it meant and what it had to do with Jesus and the Space Brothers. And by that point, he was really kind of beyond help, right? And, you know, I don't kind of blame him for it. I mean, the same thing happened to Stanislav Lem, who was one of the world's biggest Philip K. Dick fans and was much, much more intelligent than Dick. I mean, really a world-class figure. But after his wife died, Lem really lost his grip on reality. I mean, he just kind of corroded and became extremely hostile and kind of a lonely and hermetic curmudgeon who was brutal to strangers and just kind of alienated his children and all his friends. And, you know, that's an occupational hazard for somebody who's a visionary. Eventually you become unmoored, right? I mean, you can't function. You can't answer the mail. You begin having cognitive deficits and so forth. So, you know, that's how that actually worked. And I think the people who put the TV thing together actually probably did a better job of it than trying to film the story. because the story is not particularly dramatic. It's actually a very much an intellectual puzzle piece. Whereas, to have Janelle Monáe as your kind of super android is kind of inherently interesting. Yeah, so that is in fact, I think, how that worked.
I love the question of purpose that came up in the chat from Pablo, and I love that it came up on the future of work side, in a sense, of our division of labor, because to me, the story, among other things, it's a parable of finding purpose between post-apocalyptic precarity and consumerist excess, both of which you have in the same story. Like, well, so why does anyone do what they do? Why does the automation do what it does? Why do people do what they do? The questions raised, and that maybe not answered by the story. Pablo, if you'd like to riff on that, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on it, or anybody else.
Yes, I was thinking about both what Sabrina mentioned about Autofac's purpose of producing consumers, because they could produce nonetheless, and they didn't even care about the new human beings consuming what they produce. They just needed them to be there. And also, there were several villages, and in this one in particular, at least this android, or Zabriskie, she would feel that they were different because others were beginning to feel love. She wasn't feeling that in particular, at least, or not during the whole plan. But she saw how others began to feel love, and that would differentiate them from other androids. So that seek of purpose on each side of them, it would justify each side's actions against the others. And eventually it's kind of the way of the original story of each side pitted against each other to destroy each other.
Yeah, really, this is all really resonating for me with the sort of Gupta's call in the plenary, right, for an ethos of future of work to emerge, on the worker side, right, not to be imposed from the top down by policymakers and corporations, right, because it's the only place that it feels like it could really happen. All right, we are coming up on the hour, so we have a final statements moment. We have a very nice reading in the chat from Ken Fleischman from the iSchool, thinking about this plot as the inverse of the Matrix plot in terms of the disposition of real people and machines. I would like just to invite our main panelists to share a final thought, and maybe we can start with you, Bruce, and then go back to Nitin and Simone, kind of go back in reverse order. And and I just want to say, Bruce, that I'm really glad that you got into that about the kind of co-composition of Autofac with through Android Stream of Electric Sheep in this presentation of the narrative. And I was wondering, how, if you could just talk a bit in conclusion about whatever you like, but maybe in particular, kind of how it feels to be adapted, right? Like, Philip K. Dick is gone, right? So, he's not reacting to, this what's been done to his work here. But when you see your work adapted, when you think about writerly adaptations, how does this kind of reuse by the machine feel?
Well, it kind of depends on who's doing it and how much of the tar baby you get on you. So, William Gibson is a guy who actually likes to hang out in Los Angeles with movie people, and he's about to have one of his more recent books done with Amazon money. So he's going to be in the same position as the late Mr. Dick here. In the case of Philip K. Dick, he actually knew that his book Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep had been optioned, and he got to see some of the rushes, and then he just fell over from a stroke because, basically his brain had decayed. So he never actually saw any of these things that were done. He just became Hollywood's favorite piñata because there's so much Philip K. Dick material, and it's very easy to sell that to a producer. It's like, oh, it's another Philip K. Dick thing. It's like, and he's got tons and there's lots. Okay. So he's kind of the perfect author for doing that because he's dead and he's not going to complain. But, if you hang out, you have like the George Martin problem where, George did Game of Thrones, of course, and he got so involved in the movie and the TV adaptations that he was unable to finish the books, right? I mean, the celebrity of television overwhelmed his ability to kind of like do this thing. I don't think he's ever going to be able to finish those books. I think he's got a full-time job just managing the royalties and, putting up with his stalkers and the harassment he gets from social media and so forth. And I have writers, and I lived in LA for a while, and I kind of hung out with some Hollywood people. They would come sniffing around. Sometimes they gave me money. I kind of decided early on that I liked new media people a lot more. And, and I hang out with hackers and open source people and people who do installations. I know a lot of robotics guys, a lot of kinetic art people, big in Torino. Okay, you learn something from them. They maybe learn something from you. Professionally, it's not advisable. I mean, my kind of dilettante second career as a technology art critic is something that I like to do. It's not particularly profitable. It doesn't make me any more famous. I do get teaching gigs from it. And also I have more of an idea of what is actually going on in culture. But if you actually wanted to be a professionally successful science fiction writer, you'd be much better off just sticking to your last, as opposed to like moving from Austin to Turin and involving yourself in this bizarre 21st century adventure.
So, let's go to Nitin for
insane, I could say that for it.
Let's go to Nitin for a commentary on that, because one of Nitin's interests is the future of creative work, right? In the age of the virtual information. Nitin?
Yeah, I could not help but think of this whole conversation at a meta level where what if, and it's not a really iffy kind of a what if question, but it is like in the near future where content or novels or stories, and even for whoever can predict this, even televised TV production will be infused with either completely or partially with AI, synthetic production and synthetic storylines. What would machines writing stories look like? What would those stories, how would they read?
Well, that would be GPT-3, the neural net. Mm-hmm. And, I spend a lot of attention. I've been known to blur books co-written with GPT-3, and GPT-3 is the first artificial intelligence that I take seriously as a literary actor. Mm-hmm. But it can't write conventional stories, but it can in fact generate prose that's entertaining to read.
Yeah, and very convincing journalistic pieces.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I thought when Sabrina shared that screenshot was a little bit of symbolism about that moment the screenshot was from, was that Emily, what it is showing is that Emily has that capacity for empathy and perceiving feelings from others around her, because apparently she has an error in her code or a virus that she carries in her software. And that to me is an allusion to that old saying, like, to err is human. And are machines going to be capable of making errors like that? Or is it only something that makes entities human-like if they can?
Yeah, and this brings me back, to Simone's amazing presentation about Amazon and the actual state of the art in Amazon factories and in Amazon propaganda as a context for this film, right? Because what's been happening in the chat and what you guys have been saying helps us think about this is a movie that has no workers in the sense of human workers, right? Which, I don't know, maybe that's a wish fulfillment for Amazon, right? Like, oh, there's dystopia, but it's kind of great because whatever happens to the people, they're not people, so we're okay. I don't know, Simone.
They're not workers, they're industrial athletes, as Amazon, has put it.
Oh.
And with all of the comments in the chat about labor, can robots work? Do you know its work? If we don't know its work, I think and we talked about meme stocks and fungibility and NFTs. And so I'll leave with one of these memes that has been viral on spaces like TikTok. And it's a quote said, "I have no dream job. I do not dream of labor." That's it.
Beautiful.
That's a good quote.
You have to have bigger dreams than labor or work.
Thinking about, who's going to rush to get the NFT copyright on that meme. It's a scary thought. Well, that is a beautiful closing thought. We do have a couple minutes here, and Sherry's been saying such smart things in the chat. Kind of want to call on her, put her on the spot. I think I will do that. I think I will actually throw the bouquet here at the end to Sherry and to Ken, because this is part of a stream within Beyond the Future of Work that is the stream devoted to AI technology and the future of work. Here now rethought in this broader context of the future of work that goes beyond the familiar conversation. Sherry and Ken, can you talk a bit about other things that we're up to and that are coming up perhaps in the Institute?
And turn your mute off.
We may lose them to the mute.
I didn't want you to hear the dog, but I think he's, so I've been on mute. Yes, I'm happy to do that, but true confession, many of you know I'm a readaholic, but you may not know that I have been a science fiction fan since I was a tiny little girl. I would go through phases, like I'd read biographies, then I went through my sci-fi phase. I'm gonna have to go back and reread quite a few things. And this conversation has been really illuminating to me, and it's really made me think. With Good Systems, of course, we have been so delighted to be collaborating with the Future of Work and to have the session and the pop-up Beyond the Future of Work. But with Good Systems, it's really about how can we use AI for good in the world. So if you're thinking about Future of Work, which I'm the research director of, and Ken Fleischman is, of course, the founding director of Good Systems and also working on Future of Work with me, can you flip that? And can you say, how is there a way to use AI and AI assisted, whether it's jobs that are perhaps backbreaking, not eliminating the job, but eliminating the backbreaking part, right? Or is that just utopia? And this whole watching Autofac and this whole conversation has really made me think more about that. Ken?
Yeah, thank you, Sherry. Thanks so much to everyone who's been involved here. This has been phenomenal. Thanks so much, Sam, for organizing this. And it's really awesome, like you said, to have you and Neville working together on this and connecting Good Systems with the Beyond the Future Work Pop-Up Institute. And really appreciate all the words of wisdom and insights that Simone and Nitin and Bruce have provided. Bruno have provided today. Yeah, actually, this is kind of fun for me because one of my first NSF grants was about interviewing. We interviewed scientists and engineers about the influence that science fiction had on their careers. And it's really fascinating, both in terms of inspiring folks to go into science and engineering careers, and in terms of the particular technologies that they choose to develop. So that complex, we often talk about the way that science fiction can be predictive of the future, but it isn't necessarily simply predictive. Because if you wrote it and then you put it in a time capsule and didn't tell a soul about it, and someone dug it up 100 years ago, then you could say it's predictive. But in this case, it's out there in the world. People are consuming it. And the inventor of the cell phone, I believe it was the Dick Tracy wristwatch that gave the idea of remote communication in that way. And it's usually at the end, near the end of someone's career in science and engineering, they'll talk about the role that science fiction played. Because if you say, here's my PhD topic and it's inspired by a cyberpunk novel, that might not go well with your committee or with the hiring committee or what have you. But when you're at the end of the career, then you can open up and talk about the way that science fiction impacted not only your career choice, but even the innovations that you chose to develop. So I think it's important that AI researchers are thinking about these the past futures that have been represented by previous science fiction, the degree to which they have or haven't come to pass, and what's being thought about today, and the ways that could be both predictive and also influential in terms of shaping the future of AI, with the goal of in Good Systems UT Grand Challenge, shaping the role of AI for good, for everyone, for equity, for justice, trying to build a better world for society, and one that is more just and humane. And centered on and driven by the values of humans. So yeah, thanks so much, everyone. It's been a phenomenal event.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks so much, Neville and Karen, for bringing us into your fold and hosting the event. Thanks most of all to our speakers, to Bruce Sterling for staying up till who knows what hour in Spain, which Abez is made for staying up late, but there's no disco around him to keep him awake, so I don't know how he does it. And thanks so much, Nitin Verma, Simone Brown, for bringing your expertise. It's just been fantastic. And, I'd love to stay here on the Zoom with you all, but my flying car is waiting for me outside my window. So I'll be jumping into that now and hoping to see you all for more Beyond the Future of Work events tomorrow.
Go back and watch The Jetsons. Speaking of flying cars, loved it as a kid. I hated the Flintstones, but I loved The Jetsons.
Yeah, well, we're the Jetsons people here. The Flintstones people is next year's pop-up. So
right.
All right. Thanks
Bye-bye.
again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.